In the small town of Redfield, Colorado, a cold and restless night sets the stage for an unexpected encounter that will change a young boy's life forever. Liam, no older than 8, steps into the quiet police station drenched in snow and trembling. He's not just a runaway, but a child desperate for safety, a safety he believes only jail can offer. Jake Dalton, a seasoned ex-Army officer, and his loyal German shepherd Rex quickly realize there's more to the boy's story than meets the eye. As Rex instinctively steps forward to protect him, an emotional journey unfolds, revealing deep pain, abandonment, and the need for hope. What dark truth is Liam hiding? Watch the story unfold. Don't miss the touching bond between this boy and his canine companion. It was a cold, restless night in Redfield, Colorado, the kind where the world seems to slow down under a thick blanket of snow. The town was quiet, muffled by the swirling storm outside. Flurries of snow drifted lazily through the air, covering the streets in a fresh layer of white. The neon lights of Main Street flickered dimly in the distance, casting faint glows that barely penetrated the heavy snowstorm. Inside the Redfield police station, the hum of the heater was the only sound breaking the silence. The night shift had just begun, and Officer Jake Dalton sat at the front desk, his eyes scanning the empty lobby. The 36-year-old ex-Army MP had seen his fair share of danger and chaos, but tonight felt different. The night was unusually still, almost too quiet. Beside him, curled up on the floor, was his loyal partner Rex, a muscular sable and black German shepherd canine. At 5 years old, Rex was disciplined, sharp, and always ready to act. His presence was a comfort to Jake, who'd grown used to the steady rhythm of his partner's breathing. They made a perfect team, Jake with his military training and calm demeanor, and Rex with his incredible instincts and unshakable loyalty. The stillness in the air was broken when the front door creaked open. Snow flurries swirled in as a small figure stepped inside. A boy no older than 8 stood in the doorway, looking hesitant. His clothes were soaked and his shoes were too big for his small feet, worn and frayed at the edges. His brown hair, heavy with snow, clung to his forehead. The cold had made his cheeks flush red, but his lips were pale and his hands trembled at his sides. Jake straightened up, narrowing his eyes as the boy stood motionless by the door, unsure of whether he was welcome. Rex, sensing the tension, raised his head and stared at the boy with an intensity that was rare for him. Jake's eyes shifted between the boy and his partner. Something about the kid didn't sit right. "Hey there, kid," Jake called out softly, his voice calm but firm. "You all right?" The boy didn't answer immediately. He just stared at Rex, who had risen to his feet, his tail stiff and low. After what seemed like an eternity, the boy finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "Please arrest me." Jake blinked, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. "What did you say? I'm a criminal?" The boy repeated, his voice now louder but still shaky. "I stole something. You have to arrest me." Jake stood slowly, his instincts kicking in. There was more to this than just a petty crime. He moved around the desk, crouching down to the boy's level to make him feel less threatened. "What's your name, kid?" The boy hesitated for a moment before answering. Liam Carter." Jake's mind began to race. "All right, Liam. What exactly did you do?" "I took something I wasn't supposed to," Liam said quickly, almost as if he were reciting a line he had rehearsed. "That's illegal, so I should be in jail." Jake's eyebrows furrowed as he tried to make sense of the situation. The boy seemed calm enough, but the urgency in his voice and the hollow look in his eyes made Jake suspect there was something deeper going on. Liam looked up at Jake, his eyes suddenly full of something far too serious for a child his age. Because in jail, they give you 3 meals a day for free. The weight of those words hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't hunger that troubled the boy. It was something far worse. The cold, numb feeling in the pit of Jake's stomach deepened as he realized this was no ordinary situation. Something had broken inside this child. Rex, always alert, stepped closer to Liam, sniffing at his shoes before sitting down by his feet as though guarding him. Jake's hand instinctively reached out to gently touch Liam's shoulder, his expression softening. This wasn't just a case of a runaway or a child trying to get out of trouble. This was something far more serious. "Come here for a second," Jake said softly, guiding Liam toward a chair near the desk. He needed to know more, but at that moment his mind was clouded with more questions than answers. The storm outside howled louder as the door clicked shut behind them. Jake stood there looking at the small, fragile figure in front of him. He had no idea what was about to unfold, but one thing was certain. His night had just taken a very unexpected turn. Liam sat down slowly, his small body sinking into the worn chair as if the weight of the world was pulling him down. His hands, still trembling, rested on his lap, fingers curling into fists. He looked up at Jake, his eyes hollow, the kind of look only a child who had seen too much could have. The silence in the room stretched on as the heater hummed softly in the background, but the storm outside seemed to intensify, making the stillness inside feel even more suffocating. Jake kneeled in front of him, his face serious but gentle. Rex, ever loyal, remained by Liam's side, his tail flicking slightly as if he could sense the heaviness in the air. The boy's gaze darted nervously from Jake to the floor, then back to the dog before finally meeting Jake's eyes once more. The words that followed were quiet, almost ashamed. "I didn't mean to steal," Liam whispered, his voice breaking slightly, but I couldn't take it anymore. Jake's heart tightened, and he took a slow breath, trying to keep his own emotions in check. "What happened, Liam?" The boy hesitated, a tear slipping down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, his lips trembling as he began to speak. "Mom and Dad, they never took care of me. I had to do everything on my own. They were always busy with stuff," Liam continued, his voice growing weaker with each word. "But then they left me. Just left me. I didn't know where they went. They told me to stay in my room, but I didn't have any food, no clean clothes, no one to talk to." Jake's chest tightened at the boy's words, the quiet desperation in Liam's voice cutting through the stillness of the room. The pain and confusion in the child's eyes were overwhelming. "And then there was Aunt Ruby," Liam said softly, his voice steadier now, though it still wavered with the weight of the memories. "She was the only one who cared about me. She took me in when no one else would. She fed me. She talked to me. She made me feel like I mattered." Jake could hear the sorrow in Liam's voice as he spoke about his aunt. The boy's small frame shook as he swallowed hard, clearly trying to hold back more tears. "But she's gone now," Liam continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what happened to her. She went away and I never saw her again. I don't know where she went. I don't even know if she's still alive." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Liam looked down at his hands, his eyes glazing over as he tried to make sense of the pain he'd lived through. Jake sat quietly, his heart breaking for the child in front of him. He could feel the weight of Liam's words pressing down on him. The boy wasn't just a runaway. He wasn't just a child acting out. He was a kid who had been abandoned by everyone he loved, left to fend for himself with no one to trust. Jake's hand hovered near Liam's shoulder, unsure of how to offer comfort without overwhelming the boy. Instead, he let out a slow breath and spoke gently. "You don't have to be alone, Liam," Jake said softly, his voice calm but firm. "You're not alone anymore. I'll help you find out what happened to your aunt, and I'll make sure you're safe." Liam looked up, his tear-filled eyes meeting Jake's. For the first time that night, a small flicker of hope seemed to ignite in the depths of the boy's gaze. Jake could see it. The faintest hint of trust, a fragile hope that had been buried deep inside him for so long. Rex, as if sensing the shift in the air, nudged Liam's hand gently, with his nose offering a silent, comforting presence. The boy's lips twitched into the smallest of smiles as he reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears. Jake stood up slowly, his heart still heavy but with a newfound resolve. The storm outside was still raging, but inside the room felt a little warmer, a little safer. "Let's get you some food," Jake said, his voice firm but caring. "You've been through enough tonight." As Liam nodded, his grip tightening around Rex's fur, Jake couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. He had a child to protect now, and there was no going back. Jake led Liam into the small break room at the back of the station, the faint buzz of the overhead lights, the only sound in the otherwise quiet room. The storm outside raged on the wind, howling against the windows, but inside, there was a sense of calm, a brief respite from the chaos of the night. Liam shuffled quietly behind him, still holding on to Rex's fur like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The German Shepherd walked closely beside him, its eyes flicking between Liam and Jake, always alert. Jake motioned for the boy to sit at the small table, pulling out a container of leftover chili from the fridge. As the microwave hummed to life, Jake watched Liam, whose eyes were focused on the floor, avoiding eye contact. He looked smaller than ever, like a child who had lost all sense of hope. "Eat what you can," Jake said softly, placing the steaming bowl in front of Liam. But the boy didn't move. Instead, he just stared at the bowl, his fingers twitching at his sides. The way he sat, rigid, tense, as though expecting to be told to leave at any moment, broke Jake's heart. "Liam." Jake began kneeling beside him, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "I know this isn't easy, but you're safe here. No one is going to hurt you. You can eat. You can rest." The boy's shoulders twitched, and for a moment Jake thought he might finally break down. But instead, Liam reached for the spoon, his hand shaking as he dug into the chili. His eyes remained fixed on the table, and the silence between them stretched long. Jake stood back up, his eyes scanning the boy. He noticed the way Liam's clothes hung off his small frame, the way his sleeves were too short and his jeans too big. But it wasn't just the boy's appearance that struck him. It was the bruises, the deep purple marks that marred the pale skin of Liam's forearms and neck. It was hard to tell at first, but now that he was closer, Jake could see the truth in the boy's bruises. Stepping forward slowly, Jake carefully rolled Liam's sleeve up. His breath caught in his throat as he saw the deep, finger-shaped bruises that lined the boy's arms, some older and faded, others fresh and purple. They were unmistakable. Signs of violence. "Liam." Jake's voice softened, his hand instinctively reaching out to touch the boy's arm, but he stopped himself, unsure of what to say. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the silence. Liam didn't move, but his eyes flicked up for a moment, meeting Jake's gaze before looking away again. Jake swallowed hard, his stomach twisting. He had suspected something, but now it was undeniable. The bruises weren't from an accident. They were from someone who had hurt this child. Rex, who had been sitting quietly by the door, padded over to Liam's side, his ears flattened as he sniffed the boy's hand. The canine's body was tense, his tail rigid, watching Liam as though waiting for something. He gently nudged Liam's hand with his wet nose, a comforting gesture, but it also carried a sense of concern. Jake knew Rex had picked up on something too, the way the dog's instincts had gone on high alert the moment he stepped into the room. Jake crouched down beside the boy once more, trying to keep his voice steady. "Liam, who did this to you?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the concern he was struggling to keep in check. He needed answers, but he also knew the boy had already been through enough. Liam hesitated, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. He bit his lip and looked down at his food, not wanting to say anything more. Jake placed a hand gently on his shoulder, trying to reassure him without forcing him to speak. Rex gave a soft whine as if sensing the boy's hesitation. "It's okay, Liam," Jake said softly. "You don't have to tell me right now, but you're safe. I promise you that." The boy didn't respond, but Jake could see the small, almost imperceptible shift in his posture, the way his shoulders softened just slightly. For the first time since Liam had walked into the station, Jake saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was there. Trust. Jake stood up, his mind racing. The bruises on Liam's body were a painful reminder of just how much this boy had suffered. But there was still so much more to uncover. The missing Aunt Ruby, the strange circumstances surrounding Liam's story, and now the threats hanging over their heads. But for now, Jake would focus on one thing: keeping this boy safe, no matter what it took. The warmth in the break room was a small comfort against the storm still howling outside, but inside things were beginning to change. The tension that had gripped the air earlier seemed to soften just a little as the moments passed. Liam sat at the table, still quietly eating the chili, but his movements were less rigid now. His hands shook less, and the silence that had settled over him like a heavy cloak was starting to lift. Jake sat across the room watching Liam closely, but he wasn't sure what to do next. The boy had opened up, but only just. There was so much more to this than what he had told, but Jake knew better than to push. He let Liam have this time, this space, to simply be a kid, something that had been robbed from him for far too long. As Jake turned his attention to the microwave, Rex stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the boy. The German shepherd's tail wagged slowly, his body still but alert, as if sensing the subtle shift in the boy's emotions. Rex, after all, had always been the intuitive one, able to read a room in ways that Jake never could. But it wasn't just Jake who was noticing the change. It was Liam, too. The boy looked up as Rex approached, the dog's warm presence filling the air like a quiet promise. Liam's hands, which had been clenched tightly around his spoon, hesitated for just a moment. Then slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached out, extending his hand toward the dog. Rex moved closer, his large head bowing low as if offering a silent greeting. Liam's fingers brushed against the soft fur on Rex's head, the motion tentative at first. But as Rex leaned into the touch, his body warm and solid, Liam's touch became more confident, more sure. The boy's fingers ran through Rex's fur gently, the soft, rhythmic motion, bringing a sense of peace to the boy, one he hadn't felt in a long time. Jake watched as the bond between the boy and the dog deepened, and something inside him eased. He had seen it 1,000 times before, the way animals, especially dogs, could reach into a broken heart and begin to heal the pain. But seeing it in real time, seeing the way Rex's steady presence was helping Liam open up, was something Jake hadn't anticipated. Rex had always been a source of comfort for him, but tonight the dog was something more. He was a protector, a healer, and now a friend to a child who needed him more than ever. Liam's face softened as he continued to stroke Rex's fur, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't much, but it was the first time Jake had seen any sign of real peace in the boy's eyes since he walked into the station. "Rex really likes you," Jake said softly, breaking the silence, but not wanting to disrupt the moment. Liam glanced up at him, his eyes still filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "He's nice," Liam said quietly. His voice was tentative, as though he wasn't used to being treated this way. The words hung in the air, soft but meaningful, as though they carried a weight much heavier than their simple structure. Jake nodded, giving the boy a small smile. "Yeah, he is. He's got a good heart, just like you." Liam blinked at Jake, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he turned back to Rex, scratching behind the dog's ears, the smile becoming a little more pronounced. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For the first time, Liam seemed to let go of some of the tension that had clung to him since Jake had met him. The trust he had slowly been building with Jake was now extending to Rex. Rex leaned into the boy's touch, his eyes softening as though to say, "You're safe now." The quiet exchange between the boy and the dog was more than just an interaction. It was a healing process in motion. Liam, who had been abandoned, ignored, and hurt by those he loved, was finally experiencing a moment of warmth, of acceptance, and of care. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was the bridge between the broken world Liam had known and the one he could now begin to rebuild. As Jake sat quietly watching them, a realization hit him. He had always known Rex was more than just a working dog. He had always known the bond between them was special. But seeing this bond now, the way Rex was reaching out to Liam without hesitation, made Jake realize that perhaps this wasn't just about protecting the boy. Perhaps in some way, Rex was here to help the boy find a new sense of family, one built not on blood, but on trust, loyalty, and love. The microwave beeped, breaking the moment, but Jake didn't rush to get up. He let Liam continue his quiet interaction with Rex, letting the boy experience the comfort that only a dog like Rex could provide. Finally, after a long silence, Jake spoke again. "You ready to get started?" he asked, his voice soft but purposeful. Liam didn't respond immediately, but as he looked at Rex, the small smile returned. He nodded, and for the first time that night there was a spark of something else in his eyes: determination. He wasn't just a scared child anymore. He was starting to believe that he could make it through this. And with Rex by his side, maybe, just maybe, he could. The storm outside had begun to subside, but the tension in the room remained. Jake could feel the weight of the investigation pressing down on him. As he sat at the small desk, flipping through the papers in front of him, his mind raced through the sparse details Liam had provided. Ruby had been the boy's only family left, and now she was missing. Vanished without a trace. Jake looked over at Liam, who was sitting quietly, his attention fixed on Rex, who had curled up next to him on the floor. The boy had been through so much, and yet there was something in his eyes, a small, flickering spark of hope. Maybe it was because he felt safe for the first time in what seemed like forever. Maybe it was because Rex, as loyal as always, was with him. But the reality of the situation hit Jake hard. Ruby's disappearance wasn't a simple case of a missing person. The letter she had left behind hinted at something much darker, something far more dangerous. Ruby had stumbled upon something worth killing for. Jake stood up and walked to the small file cabinet in the corner of the room. He pulled out the folder that contained everything they knew about Ruby so far. There wasn't much. A librarian by trade, Ruby had kept to herself for the most part. But the more Jake thought about it, the more he realized just how out of place it was for someone like Ruby to suddenly vanish without a word. He pulled out the crumpled envelope Liam had handed him earlier, the one with the hastily written note. The message was as cryptic as it was unsettling. It spoke of something she had seen, something she shouldn't have. It mentioned plain sedans questions and something about a red drive, a USB stick that could be the key to everything. Jake had already seen what was on that drive, but there was more to this than just digital files. Ruby had been scared, and she had wanted to make sure that if something happened to her, the information would be handed over to the right people. Jake stared at the letter, his fingers brushing the edge of the paper as he read over it once more. "If something happens to me, give this to the police. Don't trust anyone, especially them. The red drive holds everything." It was the phrase "especially them" that haunted him. Who was she talking about? Who had Ruby been afraid of, and why was she suddenly under the radar of a dangerous network? The letter was the first real lead Jake had, and it was clear it wasn't just a warning, it was a cry for help. Someone was after Ruby, and they weren't just interested in her disappearance. They were after whatever she knew, whatever she had uncovered. Jake couldn't let that go. He turned to Liam, who was still petting Rex absently, looking lost in his thoughts. "Liam," Jake said softly, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency, "you told me Ruby was the only one who ever cared for you. If we're going to find her, we need to trust the things she left behind. We need to figure out what she was getting into and what it was that scared her so much." Liam looked up, his eyes wide but resolute. "I know. She told me once when I was younger not to trust people who wore suits or drove fancy cars. I never understood why she said that." Jake felt the weight of Liam's words. Ruby had known something. And it wasn't just an ordinary case of a missing person, it was far more complex. There was an underground network, and Ruby had uncovered something they didn't want exposed. "Did she ever mention anything else? Any names? Any places?" Jake asked, leaning forward slightly, his gaze focused on the boy. Liam shook his head, but then something in his expression shifted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was small, weathered, and the edges were slightly torn. He handed it to Jake. "It's the address," Liam said quietly. "Ruby wrote it down for me the last time I saw her. She said it was where she was going, but she never came back." Jake unfolded the paper and looked at the address. It was a small house on Willow Street, not far from the train tracks. But it wasn't just the address that caught his eye, it was the note written underneath it. "They're watching me. I don't know how much longer I have. Be careful, Liam." Jake's mind raced. This was it. This was the next step in finding Ruby. But it also meant stepping deeper into a world he wasn't prepared for. The kind of world where people disappeared and the truth was buried beneath lies and fear. He stuffed the paper into his jacket pocket and turned to Liam. "I need you to stay here, all right? I'm going to follow this lead. I'll keep you updated." Liam nodded, his eyes full of a mix of fear and trust. Jake could see it now. The boy wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was trying to understand what had happened to the people he loved and why they had left him. "Don't worry, Liam," Jake reassured him. "We'll find her. I promise." As Jake grabbed his coat and reached for the door, Rex stood and padded over to Liam sitting at his feet. The dog's gaze was sharp, alert, and unwavering. It was clear that Rex wasn't just a partner to Jake. He was a protector of Liam now, too. Jake paused for a moment at the door, glancing back at the boy and his dog. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of storm was brewing, and Jake Dalton wasn't going to stop until he uncovered the truth. The wind had died down by the time Jake reached the street. The snow was still heavy, clinging to the edges of buildings and cars, but the air was still and quiet. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets as he walked, his mind working overtime. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The address Liam had given him was on a street Jake knew well, but the implications behind it were far from familiar. Jake had made his way to Willow Street without hesitation. His thoughts kept returning to the note Ruby had left behind. The mention of Falcon had stuck with him the most. It was a name he had never heard of, but the way Ruby had written it, the fear in her words, was impossible to ignore. Whatever this group was, it was dangerous. And Ruby had uncovered something so big that it had cost her life. As he arrived at the small house, he paused for a moment. It wasn't much to look at. A modest two-story with a mailbox barely hanging on by its rusted hinges. The windows were boarded up, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds and snow. The house looked abandoned, as though time had forgotten it. But Jake had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. Jake pushed open the creaky front gate, his eyes scanning the area. There was no sign of movement, no sounds, just the eerie stillness of a place that had been left behind. His boots crunched in the snow as he made his way to the door, his hand hovering near his holster. Jake's heart raced with each step. Something about this place didn't sit right. It wasn't just the house, it was everything about it. The fact that Ruby had come here, the fact that she had left something behind for Liam. He knew this was the lead he had been waiting for. But the closer he got, the more uncertain he became. Was Ruby really just a victim caught in the middle of something bigger? Or was she deeper into something dangerous than he had realized? The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside the house was dark, the faintest light filtering through the boarded windows. Dust covered everything, the furniture, the counters, even the floors. It looked as if no one had stepped foot here in years, but something felt off, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. Jake moved cautiously, every sense alert. He walked through the small living room, past an overturned chair, through to the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of mildew mixed with something else, a chemical scent, sharp and bitter, the kind of scent that made Jake's skin prickle. It was then that he spotted it, hidden beneath a stack of old newspapers tucked away in a small drawer by the sink. It was a USB flash drive. Jake's pulse quickened as he picked it up, turning it over in his hand. The red cap stood out against the dust, and there were no labels, just a simple, anonymous piece of technology. But Jake knew better than to take something like this lightly. This was it. This was the clue Ruby had left behind. The USB. It was the very thing she had warned Liam about in her letter, the thing that would prove whatever she had uncovered. Jake slid the flash drive into his pocket, his mind racing. He had no idea what was on it, but he knew it was important. And the fact that Ruby had hidden it here in this rundown house confirmed his suspicion. She had found something dangerous, something worth killing for. The weight of the situation hit Jake hard. Ruby had stumbled upon a criminal network so large it had a name, Falcon. But what was Falcon? And why was Ruby involved? He had to know. Just as he turned to leave, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. There was a noise, faint at first but unmistakable. A soft thud. Then the sound of footsteps in the snow outside. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Someone was here. He moved swiftly, instinctively, reaching for his gun, his other hand brushing the flash drive in his pocket for reassurance. Rex was right behind him, his ears perked and his tail stiff. Jake reached the window and peeked through the blinds. There was no mistaking it now. 2 men were approaching the house. They weren't just casual visitors. They moved with purpose, scanning the area as if searching for something or someone. Jake's mind raced. It was clear now. Someone had been watching Ruby and they were here for the evidence, the USB, and they weren't going to stop until they had it. With a calm breath, Jake backed away from the window. The next steps had to be calculated. He couldn't risk being spotted. He needed backup. Jake turned to Rex, his voice low and firm. "Stay close, boy." The storm outside had cleared, but the storm inside was just beginning. Jake knew that finding Ruby was only the first step. Now he had to protect the evidence and keep Liam safe. The night had gone still again, but this time the quiet felt like the calm before a storm. Jake's mind raced as he tried to think through his next move. The 2 men outside weren't there by coincidence. They were here for something, and he had no doubt it was the USB in his pocket. Jake pressed his back to the wall, eyes scanning the small living room for any advantage. Rex stood at attention by his side, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to act. The German Shepherd's keen senses were a steady comfort, but Jake knew that this time their usual calm would be tested. The men outside were no amateurs. They had been watching Ruby's house for days, maybe even longer. Now they were here to tie up loose ends, and that meant getting to the evidence, the very thing that could bring their entire operation crashing down. A loud bang broke the silence. It came from the back of the house, followed by the sound of footsteps rushing across the snow. Jake's heart skipped a beat. They were here. Now. "Stay quiet, Rex." Jake whispered, his voice low but firm. The dog's ears flattened, and he lowered himself to the floor, his body tense and ready to move. Jake's fingers brushed the grip of his gun, his other hand still clutching the USB in his pocket. He had to protect the evidence. He couldn't let them get their hands on it. If they did all of this, all of Ruby's work would be in vain, and the danger would only grow. The back door suddenly slammed open and 2 masked figures rushed inside. They moved quickly, efficiently, trained. Jake's instincts kicked in, and he moved into the hallway, gun drawn. Rex was right behind him, his growl low and menacing. The attackers had no idea what they were walking into. The first man saw Jake and lunged, but Rex was faster. The dog launched himself at the intruder, his teeth sinking into the man's arm. The man yelled out, but Rex didn't let go. The second attacker pulled a gun, aiming at Jake. The sight of it made Jake's pulse quicken, but he didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the first shot that grazed the wall beside him. His own gun fired twice, and the second man staggered back, dropping his weapon to the floor. Rex, still holding tight to the first attacker, refused to release his grip. Jake moved forward, using the distraction to knock the man to the floor with a forceful tackle. He secured the man's hands, twisting them behind his back before the attacker had a chance to fight back. Rex released his hold and stood guard over both men, his eyes darting between them, ready for the next move. The second man was still disoriented from the gunshot, and Jake wasted no time securing him. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it until he was forced to the ground. Sweat dripped from Jake's forehead as the adrenaline surged, his body on high alert. Rex's low growl echoed in the room as Jake stood over the 2 intruders. "Who sent you, Jake?" demanded, his voice sharp. "What do you want with the USB?" The men were silent, their faces masked, but Jake could see the fear in their eyes. They hadn't expected resistance like this. Jake's grip tightened on the man's collar, his patience running thin. One of the men finally spoke, his voice shaky. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Falcon. They're everywhere. You'll never stop them." Jake's eyes narrowed. "You're right about one thing. It's too late to back down now." Rex, sensing the shift, let out a sharp bark, causing the 2 men to flinch. The dog's presence was more than just intimidating. It was a reminder of who was in charge. Jake glanced at Rex, who stood tall, unyielding. The dog was more than just a partner. He was a protector. Jake turned back to the men. "You're not going anywhere, not until we get some answers." With both men restrained, Jake's mind raced. Falcon. Whoever they were powerful, and they were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. But Jake wasn't going to let that stop him. He had a duty to protect Liam and to uncover the truth. This wasn't just about Ruby anymore. It was about something much bigger, and Jake couldn't walk away now. The situation was far from over. Jake had to keep the evidence safe, and Liam's safety was his first priority. There was still much to uncover, and he had no intention of backing down. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating even. Jake stood over the two restrained men, his mind still racing with the implications of their words. Falcon, a name that had become the key to everything. Whoever they were willing to kill for their secrets. But Jake couldn't let fear paralyze him, not now. He glanced down at Rex, who stood by his side, his eyes still sharp and focused on the two intruders. The dog's presence was a constant reassurance, the one thing that steadied Jake when everything else felt like it was slipping out of his control. Jake knew that this fight wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't even just about the USB or the criminal network threatening them. This was about a little boy, Liam, who had already lost so much. And Jake wasn't about to let him lose more. "We're going to find her, Rex," Jake said softly, his voice firm with resolve. The dog's ears perked up as though understanding, and he padded silently at Jake's heels as they moved toward the door. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the town in an eerie calm. Snow still clung to the trees, the ground a thick blanket of white. Jake pulled his coat tighter around him, squinting against the cold as he stepped into the street. Rex followed his steps, precise, his nose to the ground, ever alert. They headed toward Willow Street, the place where Ruby's disappearance had begun and where Jake hoped it would end. The address was all they had to go on, and despite the empty feeling the house had left in him, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. More to this story, more to Ruby's disappearance. And he was determined to find out what. As they walked, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. He knew time was running out. The longer Ruby was missing, the more dangerous it became. Every passing minute could be the difference between finding her alive or too late. Rex was the one who kept him going, his unspoken support a constant source of strength. The dog's senses were sharp, and Jake trusted him more than he trusted most people. If anyone could track down Ruby, it was Rex. They had been through battles together before. This would be no different. They moved from one desolate area to another, broken down warehouses, abandoned lots, and crumbling buildings. Each place seemed to lead nowhere. The search was slow, methodical, and tiring, but Jake refused to give up. He knew Ruby's life was on the line, and he couldn't afford to stop now. Not when the stakes were this high. After hours of searching, they came to the edge of town, to a stretch of land that seemed forgotten by time. The area was sparsely populated, a few run-down houses scattered between thick trees and unkempt fields. The scent of wet earth and old decaying wood filled the air, and the silence pressed down on them, heavier than before. This place felt wrong, too quiet, too empty. It was as if something was hiding here, waiting to be uncovered. Rex stopped abruptly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. His body grew tense, his ears forward as though he had picked up a scent Jake couldn't detect. The dog let out a low growl, a warning, and Jake's hand instinctively went to his holster. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, moving cautiously toward Rex. His heart raced, anticipation mounting. Something was here. He could feel it. The question was what or who? Rex trotted ahead, his movements swift and purposeful. Jake followed closely, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air, but there was no time to waste. They had to be close. As they reached a small run-down cabin at the far end of the property, Rex stopped and turned toward Jake, his body still and alert. Jake knelt down beside him, his hand brushing over Rex's fur. Both of them waiting in tense silence. "Is this it, boy?" Jake whispered, looking toward the cabin. Something told him this was the place the one Ruby had tried to reach before everything fell apart, the one she had been running from. Jake's hand tightened on his gun as he stood up. He wasn't sure what he was about to walk into, but he was ready to face whatever threat stood in his way. As they approached the cabin, Jake's mind raced. This wasn't just about finding Ruby anymore. It was about ending whatever had started with her disappearance, about stopping the Falcon network from hurting anyone else, and it was about keeping Liam safe. Rex padded ahead, leading the way as Jake followed, the tension rising with each step. They were close, very close. Jake's boots crunched in the snow as he and Rex approached the rundown cabin, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, snow, and something metallic that made Jake's instincts kick into high gear. Rex was tense beside him, his ears perked, his body coiled like a spring, ready to react at a moment's notice. Jake paused just outside the cabin's dilapidated door. The house was silent, its windows dark, almost lifeless. But Jake could feel it, the oppressive stillness, the sense that something was watching them. He motioned for Rex to stay, and the dog dropped to a crouch, his eyes scanning the area with unnerving precision. A low growl rumbled deep in Rex's chest, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the trees at the edge of the property, his eyes narrowing. Through the swirling snow, he could just make out a figure, a shadow moving quickly between the trees. It was too far away to make out details, but Jake's gut told him something was wrong. They weren't alone. "Stay here, Rex." "Rex," Jake murmured, his voice low and steady. He pulled his gun from its holster, the metal cold against his fingers. Slowly he crept toward the tree line, keeping to the shadows, trying not to make a sound. The figure ahead was moving cautiously, as though aware of their presence but not yet ready to strike. Jake's pulse quickened. Whoever this was, they were definitely watching him. He wasn't about to let them get the drop on him. As he moved closer, the figure paused as if sensing something. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, and just as he was about to make his move, the figure turned and faced him. The world seemed to stop. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Jake's blood ran cold. The man standing in front of him, partially obscured by the swirling snow, was none other than Lieutenant Bradley Knox, the very same man Jake had worked with for years, the man he had trusted, the man he had called a friend. Jake's grip tightened on his gun, his mind racing. Bradley Knox, the very last person he had expected to see here. His heart dropped into his stomach as realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Knox wasn't just here by coincidence. He wasn't just a witness. He was part of the problem, and Jake had walked right into his trap. Jake Knox said, his voice cold and controlled, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something Jake had never seen before. It wasn't just a hardened cop. This was someone else, someone dangerous. Jake's mind raced as he took a step back, trying to process the situation. "What the hell are you doing here, Knox?" he demanded, his voice sharp, but inside his anger was beginning to boil over. "This is a crime scene. You're supposed to be helping, not..." Helping Knox cut him off, stepping forward, his posture relaxed, almost too relaxed for a man in this situation. "I am helping Jake, in ways you don't understand yet." The tension in the air thickened, and Jake felt Rex stir beside him, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Jake took another step back, keeping his gun raised but steady. His eyes never left Knox's face, trying to read the man he had once called a friend. Knox smiled, a thin, calculating smile that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "You've been chasing shadows, Jake. Falcon is bigger than you think. And you're in way over your head." The words hung in the air like poison, each syllable weighing heavier than the last. Falcon. The name Ruby had written on the USB, the same name the men in the house had spoken. And now Jake realized it was connected to Knox. Knox had been working with them all along, playing both sides, until now when his true allegiances were clear. Jake's chest tightened with anger. His hands clenched around the gun, the cold metal digging into his palm. He couldn't believe it. One of his own part of the corruption that had taken Ruby's life that was now threatening Liam's. This was a betrayal unlike anything he had ever felt. "I trusted you," Jake said, his voice low, the hurt evident beneath the fury. "I trusted you, and you're in bed with them. You're one of them." Knox shrugged, his smile never faltering. "I did what I had to do, Jake. You can't stop it now. You've been looking for Ruby, but you'll never find her. And you're definitely not going to stop Falcon." Jake took a step forward, his eyes blazing with determination. "I'm not going anywhere, and I'm damn sure not backing down now." Before Jake could react, Rex let out a low growl, his body tensing as the scent of danger grew stronger in the air. The man wasn't alone. A sudden movement to the side caught Jake's attention. Two more figures emerged from the trees, their faces obscured by masks, their intentions clear. It was clear now. Knox wasn't just here to watch. He was here to end it all. "Get ready, Rex," Jake muttered under his breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. This was about to get a lot worse. The air around Jake thickened with tension as Knox's words continued to hang heavily between them. The cold wind whipped through the trees, rustling the branches as though the world itself was holding its breath. But it wasn't the storm outside that had Jake's blood running cold. It was the man standing before him, someone he had trusted, someone he thought was on his side. Falcon. Jake repeated the words, slipping from his mouth like poison. He could feel his pulse quicken, his hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You're really with them?" Knox's smile didn't fade. If anything, it widened, as if Jake's realization was a source of amusement. It was never about sides, Jake. It's about survival. You of all people should understand that. Jake's grip tightened on his gun, his knuckles turning white. The betrayal was a sharp knife lodged deep in his chest, cutting away at the trust he had placed in Knox. How had he not seen this before? How had he been so blind survival? Jake's voice was low, filled with a simmering rage. "You think selling out to criminals is about survival? You're no better than the scum you're working with." The words hit Jake like a slap in the face. Knox, a man he had fought beside a man he had respected, had been playing both sides all along. All those years of trust, of shared experiences, all of it had been a lie. Jake's stomach turned at the realization. He had been so focused on stopping Falcon that he never suspected the man closest to him could be part of it. "I'm the same as you," Jake Knox said with an unsettling calm. "I'm just trying to protect the people I care about. The problem is, you don't see it yet. Falcon is bigger than us both. You can't stop it. And now you're in too deep." Jake's head spun. He wanted to move to make Knox feel the weight of what he had done, but he stayed still. His eyes flicked toward Rex, whose body was tense and alert. The dog sensed the danger, ready to leap at a moment's notice. But Jake was paralyzed by the depth of the betrayal. How had Knox gotten so far gone? "I trusted you," Jake said, through gritted teeth, his voice barely a whisper of the anger he felt. "And now you're part of the reason Ruby's gone. Part of the reason this kid," he glanced back at Liam, still in the cabin, hidden behind Rex, "is going through this." Knox's face hardened, the smile slipping away. "You think I'm the problem, Jake? You think this is my fault? You're wrong. Ruby made her choice. She dug too deep. And now we're all paying the price for it." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Knox was justifying it. All the deaths, all the pain. He had chosen this path, and now he was trying to pull Jake into it. Before Jake could respond, the two men who had emerged from the trees moved forward, surrounding him. Their faces were still hidden behind masks, but their presence was enough to send a chill down Jake's spine. He knew there was no backing out now. "Move." One of the men growled, pointing a gun at Jake. "We're taking what's ours." Jake's finger tightened around the trigger, but something held him back. He wasn't just facing two armed men. He was facing a betrayal of everything he had ever stood for. He wasn't about to give up now, not with so much at stake, not with Liam depending on him. But in that moment, as the cold barrel of the gun pressed against his chest, Jake knew he was caught between two forces. One was the law he had fought to uphold. The other was the shadowy world of Falcon, where loyalty didn't exist, where betrayal was the price of survival. Jake Knox said, his voice softer now, as if trying to appeal to him. "You've always been a good cop. But sometimes good cops have to make tough decisions. You don't have to fight this. You can walk away, go back to your life." Jake looked at Knox, his eyes filled with both fury and disbelief. "This is my life now," he said, his voice cold, "and I'm not backing down." Jake knew what was coming next: the fight, the danger, but most of all the consequences of the choice he had made. He had crossed the line. There was no turning back now. The room was dark, lit only by the harsh glow of a desk lamp. Jake sat across from Elena Moore, a seasoned FBI agent who was hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. The quiet hum of the computer was the only sound in the room, aside from the occasional growl of Rex, who lay at Jake's feet, alert and tense. Jake felt the weight of the USB in his pocket, the small drive that had once belonged to Ruby. It was a piece of evidence they couldn't afford to lose, the last trace of Ruby's frantic search for the truth. After everything that had happened, Jake had hoped this would be the key to finding her, to understanding the web of corruption that had swallowed her life. But as Elena worked to decrypt the files, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were opening Pandora's box. What if Ruby had found something that would put them all in danger? What if the Falcon network was much bigger than they realized? Elena, any luck? Jake asked, his voice filled with a quiet urgency. Elena didn't look up from the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've got a few files decrypted, but most of it is encrypted with military-grade security. Whoever Ruby was working with was careful. This isn't just a small-time operation, this is big." Jake leaned forward, his eyes scanning the screen over her shoulder. The words that flashed on the screen were like a foreign language to him. Falcon Network, classified documents, operatives, Hale Carter Knox. Jake's blood ran cold at the mention of Knox. The realization hit him like a freight train. Knox had been involved in this from the beginning, had been part of Falcon, the very network Ruby had uncovered, the same network that had taken everything from Liam and Ruby. Jake's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't speak. "What more was there to say, Elena? What else?" Jake asked, his voice tight. Elena scrolled through more of the decrypted files, her face growing more concerned as she read. "These aren't just business transactions, Jake. These are names. Important people involved in the Falcon network. This goes deep. There's a whole system in place, one that goes beyond just stolen data. They've infiltrated high levels of government law enforcement. These are people who've been paid to look the other way to cover their tracks." Jake felt his stomach turn. He had always known there were darker forces at play, but this was worse than he could have imagined. The conspiracy Ruby had uncovered was not just about crime. It was about power control and corruption on a scale that threatened the very institutions Jake had spent his life serving, and Ruby. Jake asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Elena sighed, her fingers still typing as she uncovered more files. Ruby's discovery wasn't just about names, it was about a connection. Some kind of secret meeting, a deal between high-profile figures. She got too close. They couldn't let her walk away with this information. That's why she's gone. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. It all made sense now. Ruby had been trying to expose the corruption within Falcon, trying to bring it all to light. And in doing so, she had become a target. A cold silence fell between them as Elena continued to search through the files, each one revealing more disturbing truths about the network's reach. But it wasn't just about the files anymore. It was about the people involved, and the fact that they were still out there, still working behind the scenes. Finally, Elena looked up at Jake, her face pale. "Jake, we need to move fast. These people, whoever they are, they're not going to stop, and they're going to come after you next if they haven't already." Jake nodded, his mind already racing with the next steps. He couldn't waste time. They had to find Ruby before it was too late. As he stood up, Rex lifted his head, his ears pricked. Jake met the dog's eyes. They both knew the same thing now. The hunt was on. The night felt heavier than ever as Jake and Elena prepared to move out. The files on the USB had revealed a sinister web of corruption, but it was Ruby's disappearance that haunted Jake's thoughts most. Where had they taken her? And how could he uncover the truth before it was too late? Jake pulled on his jacket, his hand reaching for his sidearm instinctively as he stood. The air was thick with unease, but there was no time for hesitation. Every moment spent in Redfield was a moment that could be wasted. Whoever was behind this, whoever had taken Ruby, was still out there watching, waiting for the right moment to strike, and Jake wasn't going to give them that opportunity. Rex stood beside him, his posture alert, his eyes never leaving the door. The dog had always been able to sense danger before it even reached them, and tonight he seemed even more attuned to the tense atmosphere. Jake knelt down beside Rex, his hand gently brushing through the dog's fur. "We're going to find her, Rex," Jake said, his voice low but filled with determination. Rex let out a soft whine, his eyes locked with Jake's. There was an understanding between them, one that didn't need words. As Jake and Elena headed out into the night, the wind had started to pick up again, a faint dusting of snow swirling around them. The streets of Redfield were eerily quiet, the usual sounds of the town silenced by the thick blanket of snow. It felt like the calm before a storm, and Jake could feel it in his bones. Something was about to happen. They reached the outskirts of town, and Jake's heart quickened as they approached the abandoned warehouse. The place was exactly as he remembered, dark, desolate, and forgotten. A few years ago, this area had been bustling with activity, but now it seemed to stand as a hollow shell of its former self. Jake scanned the perimeter, his eyes moving from the rusted gates to the broken windows. "This is it," he muttered, more to himself than to Elena. "This is where she's been kept." Elena glanced at Jake, her expression serious. "Let's be careful," she said, her voice calm but tinged with caution. "We don't know who's inside." Jake nodded, his eyes narrowed as he moved cautiously toward the door. Rex padded silently beside him, alert and ready. They had made it this far, but the real danger had only just begun. The moment they crossed the threshold of the warehouse, Jake's senses were on high alert. The air inside was damp and thick with the smell of old metal and mold. Broken crates were scattered around, their contents long gone. Shadows crept across the walls, the only light coming from the faint glow of streetlights outside. And then as they moved deeper into the building, they heard it, faint but unmistakable, a low hum followed by the sudden crackling sound of something being disturbed. Jake's heart skipped a beat as the hair on the back of his neck stood up. "Get down!" he shouted to Elena, pulling her to the ground just as the explosion went off. The blast rocked the warehouse, sending a shockwave through the air. The ground trembled beneath them as flames erupted from the far end of the building. The sound of debris crashing echoed in the chaos, and Jake barely had time to react before the heat from the fire slammed into him like a wall. Rex barked furiously, his body tense as he scrambled to protect Jake. The explosion had sent a rain of metal shrapnel and wood across the floor, and Jake could feel the searing pain as a piece of debris grazed his arm. His ears rang the noise of the blast still reverberating in his head. "Move!" Elena shouted, pulling Jake up from the ground. The fire was spreading fast, and they had no time to waste. Jake could barely think straight. The smoke was thick, clouding his vision, but Rex was already moving forward, barking as if urging them to follow. Jake didn't hesitate. He followed Rex Elena close behind, weaving through the debris and rubble. As they moved, Jake's thoughts raced. The explosion had been a warning, a message from whoever was behind Falcon. They had to have known they were coming. They knew the danger was real, and they weren't going to let Jake and his team walk away with Ruby's secrets. The fire was getting closer, but Jake didn't stop. He couldn't. There was no turning back now. Not until Ruby was safe. Not until the truth came out. Suddenly, Rex stopped in his tracks, his body rigid as he stared at something in the smoke. Jake's heart raced as he followed the dog's gaze. There, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure, someone standing in the doorway watching them. Jake's grip tightened on his gun. He knew they weren't alone. The real fight was just beginning. The smoke was thick and choking, swirling around Jake like a dense fog. He barely had time to react before Rex's low growl broke through the chaos. The dog's body was taut, his eyes locked on the shadowy figure standing just inside the doorway, barely visible through the haze. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he instinctively reached for his gun, eyes narrowing. The silhouette didn't move, but the presence of the figure was enough to send a surge of adrenaline through Jake's veins. They were being watched, and the people behind this attack weren't going to let them walk away easily. Stay close, Elena. Jake whispered, his voice steady despite the rising tension. We're not alone. Elena, already on edge from the explosion, nodded grimly, her eyes scanning the smoke for any sign of movement. Rex stepped forward cautiously, still growling, his posture protective, as if he sensed something more dangerous than just a man standing in the doorway. The figure didn't step closer, but Jake could feel the weight of their gaze, the silent threat hanging in the air like a suffocating presence. Just as Jake took a step forward, his phone vibrated in his pocket. The sudden buzz startled him, but he didn't hesitate. With one hand on his gun, he reached into his jacket and pulled it out. The number was unfamiliar, but the name that flashed on the screen was not. Blocked number. But it didn't matter. Jake knew who was calling. The voice on the other end was calm, unnervingly so. Jake Dalton, the voice said smoothly, almost amused. You should have walked away when you had the chance. You're making a mistake. A big one. Jake's grip tightened on the phone, his pulse quickening. He had heard that voice before. It was cold, calculated. The same voice he had heard in the files Ruby had uncovered. The same voice that had been lurking in the shadows, orchestrating everything. Who is this? Jake demanded, his voice sharp as he scanned the area. The smoke made it hard to see, but every fiber of his being was on high alert. The voice chuckled softly, the sound sending a chill down Jake's spine. You know who I am, Jake. You've been chasing ghosts. You've been chasing a woman who couldn't keep her mouth shut, but now you're chasing something far bigger, something you won't be able to stop. Jake's mind raced. Falcon. Whoever this was, they were at the heart of it. The web of corruption, the trafficking, the people behind it all. They were warning him. But this wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. I'm not backing down, Jake said, his voice steady, though his heart was hammering in his chest. You're not going to scare me. I'm coming for Ruby. The voice on the other end was silent for a moment, as if considering his words. Then the tone shifted, growing more ominous. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about finding Ruby. This is about stopping you from getting in the way of something much bigger. If you continue down this path, Ruby's death will be nothing compared to what will happen to you and the boy. We've been watching you, Jake, and now we're going to make sure you don't find what you're looking for. Jake felt his blood run cold. He knew they were capable of anything, but hearing the words out loud made the threat all too real. They were willing to kill to keep their secrets. And Ruby's life was just the beginning of their trail of destruction. The line clicked dead before Jake could respond. The silence that followed was suffocating. He stared at the phone for a moment, his mind processing the weight of the threat. But there was no time for doubt. The stakes had never been higher. He glanced at Elena, her face hard with determination. They know we're getting close. We need to move. Now. Elena nodded, her jaw clenched in resolve. She stepped forward, her hand resting on the gun at her side. Let's go. We're not backing down either. Jake glanced at Rex, who stood alert beside them. The dog's eyes were sharp, scanning the smoke-filled warehouse, waiting for the next move. Rex had always been a step ahead, and Jake knew that now more than ever they needed to stick together. They had to find Ruby before it was too late. Jake's heart raced, but his mind was clear. The enemy had just made their move, and now it was time to make his. They were in this until the end. The air inside the dilapidated warehouse was thick with tension, the smell of smoke and oil hanging heavy. Jake's boots crunched over debris as he and Elena moved through the building, keeping to the shadows, the only sound the faint rustling of Rex's paws against the cold floor. The faint glow from their flashlights flickered in the darkness, revealing rusted metal beams, broken crates, and piles of discarded equipment. The place had the feel of something long forgotten, yet Jake could sense the presence of life here. Ruby had to be close. They had followed the trail of clues, all leading to this very spot. The encrypted files, the warning call, and now the final destination, the place where Ruby had been kept hidden. Jake's chest tightened with each step. His mind was sharp-focused, but the fear of what they might find nagged at him. This wasn't just about bringing Ruby back anymore. It was about saving her life and stopping the people behind Falcon from getting away with everything. Rex moved ahead, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, leading them deeper into the heart of the warehouse. The dog's body was low to the ground, moving with practiced silence. Jake followed closely, Elena just behind him. The tension was palpable, the weight of their mission pressing down on all of them. As they reached the far end of the building, the warehouse opened up into a large storage room. Shadows played across the walls as their flashlights swept over the space. And then there it was. At the back of the room, a small makeshift cell, no more than a few metal bars and a locked door, stood against the wall. Inside, lying on a filthy mattress, was Ruby. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he saw her. She was thinner than he remembered, her once vibrant hair now dull and tangled. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, Jake rushed forward, his gun raised in case anyone was still hiding in the shadows. But the room was empty. The men who had held her captive were nowhere to be seen. Elena quickly moved to Ruby's side, crouching beside her. "Ruby," she said softly, her voice filled with relief. "We're here. You're safe." Ruby's eyes flickered open, and for a moment she looked confused, as if trying to process what was happening. Her gaze fell on Elena, then on Jake, and finally on Rex, who stood at attention beside him. "Jake!" Ruby whispered, her voice weak. "You found me." Jake's heart swelled with relief, but he didn't let himself relax just yet. There was still danger, and they had to get out of there. "Fast! We're getting you out of here, Ruby." Jake said, his voice steady but urgent. He reached out and helped her sit up, his hands gentle as he supported her frail body. "But we have to move quickly." As Jake helped Ruby to her feet, he heard a noise, a faint scrape of metal against concrete. His heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. Rex immediately growled, his body stiffening, eyes scanning the room. Jake's hand flew to his gun, his body tensing as he searched the shadows for any sign of movement. "Elena, get Ruby to cover, Jake," ordered, his voice low and firm. He didn't wait for her response. He knew she'd do it, without hesitation. Elena helped Ruby stagger to a corner, and Jake moved forward, his senses on high alert. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Jake's mind raced. This wasn't just about rescuing Ruby anymore. This was about keeping her alive. They had come too far to fail now. A figure appeared from the shadows. It was a man tall, dressed in dark tactical gear. His face was partially obscured by a mask, but his posture, his confidence, spoke volumes. Jake's hand tightened on his gun, ready to fire. But before he could make his move, the man spoke, his voice calm but laced with menace. "You should have walked away, Jake," the man said, his voice cool. "But now you've gone too far. You've put yourself and her in danger." Jake's eyes narrowed. The threat was real, and it wasn't just about Ruby anymore. This was bigger. It was a fight for survival, and Jake knew he couldn't back down. "Stay down, Rex." Jake muttered, his eyes never leaving the man in front of him. He knew what came next. The confrontation. Ruby was safe for now, but the battle was far from over. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension. The man in tactical gear stood unmoving. His eyes locked on Jake, but his attention flicked occasionally to Ruby. The flash of danger in his eyes told Jake all he needed to know. This wasn't just an ordinary confrontation. This was the moment where everything that had been building up would come to a head. "Ruby," Jake said urgently, keeping his gun trained on the masked man, "tell me what you know. Everything." Ruby was weak, still frail from her time in captivity, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. She took a shaky breath, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I didn't just stumble onto Falcon," she began, her words heavy with the burden of her knowledge. "I was doing research. It started with a few stolen files that were dumped at the library, anonymous, just names at first, but then they kept coming. I started piecing things together." Jake moved a step closer to her, trying to block her from the masked man's view. He knew the stakes now. Ruby had known too much, and the people behind Falcon couldn't allow that to continue. "They're big, Jake. Bigger than you think. They're not just a criminal group. They're a shadow organization embedded in governments, corporations, law enforcement. They control everything from the top down, and they make sure no one gets in their way," Ruby said, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "I discovered that they've been orchestrating global operations, corruption, data theft, even political assassinations." Jake's mind was racing. He had suspected it, but hearing it from Ruby confirming it made the threat all too real. Falcon wasn't just about smuggling or money laundering. This was a network that had infiltrated the very systems that were supposed to protect people, and Ruby had uncovered it all. "The files I found, they're not just names," Ruby continued, her face pale but determined. "They're plans, strategies, evidence, the kind of evidence they would kill for." Her eyes flicked to the man in tactical gear, a flicker of recognition. "Victor Hale is at the center of it all. He's the one pulling the strings. He's a ghost, a former operative, and now he's controlling everything." Jake's heart skipped. Victor Hale. The name had been whispered in the files. They had found a shadowy figure who had been working in the background for years. Now it was clear. Hale wasn't just an informant. He was the mastermind. Ruby paused for a moment, her breath shaky. I couldn't sit back. I couldn't let them continue. I tried to get the truth out. I made copies of the files, and that's when they came for me. I tried to run, but they caught me. They knew I was getting too close. Jake's mind snapped back to the present. The masked man in front of them was a hunter, and Ruby was his prey. Ruby's voice faltered as she met Jake's eyes. "The USB I gave you, it has everything. The names, the locations, the plans. But if they get it back, if they get me back..." Her eyes filled with fear. "They'll stop at nothing to cover this up, Jake, and they won't stop coming after you, after Liam, after all of us." The weight of Ruby's words hit Jake like a freight train. The gravity of what Ruby had uncovered and what she was willing to risk was clear. She had given everything for the truth, and now it was up to him to make sure it didn't die with her. Jake's grip tightened on his gun as he looked at the man in the tactical gear who was still standing calmly, almost smugly. Jake knew the truth now. Victor Hale was behind this. And this wasn't just about Ruby anymore. It was about stopping a network of corruption that threatened everything. The man shifted slightly, his eyes flicking toward the exit. Jake could sense the tension in the air. This confrontation wasn't over, not yet. Ruby reached out weakly, her hand brushing Jake's arm. "You have to destroy the files, Jake. It's the only way to stop them. Don't let them win. Don't let my death be in vain." Jake nodded grimly. "I won't let them win, Ruby. I promise." But as he turned to face the man in tactical gear, the reality hit him. The battle had only just begun. Ruby had told him the truth, but now it was up to him to make sure the world knew it too. And that meant facing down Victor Hale and his network no matter the cost. The silence in the warehouse was deafening, broken only by the low hiss of the fire still licking at the edges of the room. The man in tactical gear stood like a statue, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable behind the mask. Jake's gun was aimed at him, steady and unyielding, but deep inside a cold fury simmered. Ruby had told him everything. Now it was time to stop Victor Hale and the network that had ruined countless lives, including Ruby's, but the immediate threat was closer than ever. Jake's thoughts raced as his hand tightened around his weapon. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting to protect Liam and stop an empire built on lies and corruption. The man before him was no longer just a soldier in the shadows. He was the gatekeeper to an organization that could destroy everything Jake had fought for. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps pounding against the floor. Jake's heart skipped a beat. His instincts kicked in immediately. This wasn't just a standoff anymore. The enemy was closing in. Closing. "Stay close, Rex," Jake whispered urgently, his voice low but resolute. Rex was already at his side, his body taut with anticipation, his eyes flicking back and forth between Jake and the growing noise behind them. Jake's grip on his gun tightened as the door to the warehouse exploded open. In a blur, 3 more figures stormed into the room, armed and dangerous. They weren't wearing masks this time. Jake recognized the first one as Colonel Burns, a man who had been in the police force for years. Now it was clear where his loyalties truly lay. Jake's pulse quickened, his gaze snapping to Liam, who was still in the corner of the room, crouched beside Rex, looking lost and confused, but thankfully safe, for now. The situation had escalated faster than Jake had anticipated. Falcon's reach was more extensive than Jake could have imagined. They were coming for Liam now, and they were coming for the evidence. "Liam, stay down." Jake shouted, his voice carrying an edge of panic as he moved to shield the boy. Rex was the first to react. The moment he saw Burns approach, the dog's instincts kicked in. With a snarl, he launched himself toward the man, his teeth bared. Burns barely had time to react as Rex tackled him to the ground, his powerful jaws locking around the man's arm. The sound of a muffled grunt filled the air as Burns struggled beneath the dog's hold. Jake didn't wait for anything else. He rushed toward the 2 other attackers, who were now advancing on him. His gunfire broke the tense silence, 2 shots fired with precision. One of the men dropped to the floor, a red stain spreading across his chest. The other hesitated, his eyes flicking between Jake and Rex, fear beginning to cloud his judgment. Jake didn't give him the chance to decide. With swift movements, he lunged forward, knocking the remaining man off his feet. His gun was in his hand, ready to fire, but the fight seemed to drain out of the man's resolve when he realized he was cornered. "Don't do this," Jake said coldly, his voice unwavering. The man's eyes widened, but there was no escape. He knew it. "You've made a mistake. Get on the ground." The man complied, slowly lowering his weapon and kneeling, his hands raised in surrender. Jake kept his gun trained on him, moving cautiously, ensuring no one else would spring out of the shadows. But in the back of his mind, Jake knew this was only the beginning. Falcon wouldn't stop now. They'd escalate. They'd make sure to take down anyone who got in their way. And Liam was no longer safe. Not here, not anywhere. Elena's voice broke through the chaos as she rushed over to him. Her eyes were sharp, assessing the situation. "We need to move. They're not the only ones." Jake nodded sharply, his eyes flicking to the doorway. More men were likely on their way. It was clear now. They had a target on their backs. But as he glanced down at Rex, who had released Burns and was now standing guard at Liam's side, Jake's resolve hardened. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, and it gave Jake the strength he needed to keep going. They wouldn't let anyone hurt Liam. They couldn't. "We need to go," Jake said, his voice steady despite the danger swirling around them. "Elena, get Liam and Rex. I'll cover you." Elena didn't hesitate. She nodded, motioning for Liam to follow her as she moved toward the exit, keeping her eyes on the shadows. Rex, ever the protector, moved with them, his gaze scanning the area for any sign of danger. Jake stayed behind his gun ready, his back against the wall, every sense on high alert. He had made a promise to Ruby, and now he would keep it. The tension in the warehouse had reached a fever pitch. The last of the attackers had been neutralized, but Jake knew they couldn't let their guard down. Every moment spent here was one step closer to the chaos they were already entangled in. His grip tightened on his gun as he watched Elena usher Liam toward the exit, keeping the boy close, the urgency in her movements clear. Behind him, Rex stood tall, his ears alert, his eyes scanning the shadows. The German Shepherd was a sentinel, a silent protector who instinctively moved with precision, never wavering. Jake couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude toward the dog. Rex wasn't just a partner. He was a lifeline. As Elena and Liam made their way through the warehouse door, Jake turned toward the exit, determined to keep the path clear. His mind raced with the countless dangers they still faced, knowing that Falcon wasn't going to let them go easily. But just as he took a step forward, he heard it, a muffled thud from the far end of the building. His body tensed instinctively. The sound of footsteps echoed, followed by the sharp, unmistakable clink of weapons being drawn. Jake spun on his heels, eyes scanning the room. He could hear the footsteps drawing closer, quick and deliberate. More of them. His heart skipped a beat as a figure emerged from the shadows. The man was tall, fast, and seemed to have the element of surprise on his side. Before Jake could even react, the man lunged toward him with a knife aiming straight for his throat. Jake barely had time to raise his gun before the man was on him. He struggled, his muscles straining, but the assailant was too close. The knife came down in a swift arc, slicing through the air, narrowly missing Jake's neck. The force of the strike sent Jake off balance, and he stumbled backward, losing his grip on the gun. But before Jake could regain his footing, a blur of fur shot past him. Rex was there in an instant. The dog launched himself at the attacker, his powerful frame colliding with the man's midsection, knocking him to the ground with a force that sent a jolt of shock through the room. Rex's teeth sank into the man's arm, holding firm as the attacker tried to shake him off. The man yelled in pain, but Rex didn't let go. Jake stood frozen for a split second, the gun still out of reach, his heart racing as he watched his partner in action. Rex wasn't just fighting to protect him, he was fighting to protect everything they had worked for. This wasn't just a canine on a mission. This was a dog who had sacrificed for his handler before and would do it again. Rex, Jake shouted, finally recovering his bearings. His voice was firm, urging the dog to let go, but Rex held on his body tense, every muscle in his frame coiled for battle. The man let out a guttural growl, still trying to break free, but Rex was relentless. With a final snarl, the dog yanked his head back, his powerful jaws leaving the attacker disarmed and subdued. The attacker lay on the floor breathless, unable to continue the fight. Rex stepped back, panting heavily, his fur matted with sweat and blood from the struggle. He stood proudly at Jake's side, his body still brimming with the adrenaline of the fight. Jake's chest tightened as he looked at Rex, his heart full of gratitude and awe. The dog had saved him once again without hesitation. Rex had placed himself in the line of fire to protect his handler, not out of duty, but out of unconditional loyalty. Jake lowered his gun and knelt beside Rex, his hand reaching out to the dog's head. "You're something else, boy," Jake murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. Again." Rex's eyes softened as Jake patted his head, a gentle sigh escaping his lips. The dog leaned into the touch, his body still on high alert, but his loyalty unwavering. Jake knew in that moment that the bond between them was something unbreakable. They had been through hell together, and it was that loyalty, that shared understanding, that kept them going. Jake stood, his mind racing. "Let's move, Rex," he said, his voice firm. "We've still got work to do. They couldn't stay here. They had to get out fast." Ruby's life was still in danger, and the truth about Falcon had to be exposed. As Rex trotted beside him, Jake felt a surge of determination. He would not let Falcon win. Not now, not ever. The adrenaline that had surged through Jake during the confrontation was still alive, but it was quickly replaced by the urgency of the situation. Every moment spent standing still was a risk. Falcon wasn't going to give them the time they needed to regroup. Jake's eyes flicked back to where he'd left Liam, still hiding behind the cover of the doorway. The boy was waiting for his next move, eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. But there was no more time to waste. The danger was closing in. Liam, Jake called, his voice steady but carrying a sense of urgency. "Come on, we need to move, now." Liam nodded quickly, his face pale but determination beginning to fill his eyes. He knew what was at stake now. They had no choice but to run. Rex, who had already sensed the shift in the air, stood poised, his ears perked and his eyes scanning the shadows of the warehouse. The dog had always been one step ahead of Jake, guiding them through danger with his instincts and sharp senses. Now more than ever, Jake knew they needed Rex to lead them out of the peril they found themselves in. "Let's go, boy," Jake murmured, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the back exit. Rex immediately took the lead, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly toward the door. Jake followed closely behind, with Liam and Elena not far behind. They had to move fast before their enemies realized they were escaping. The air outside was bitterly cold, the wind howling through the alley as the group made their way into the open. Snow crunched beneath their feet, a sound that felt out of place in the midst of their flight. Jake's breath came in sharp bursts, the urgency of their situation quickening his pulse. But Rex wasn't wasting any time. The dog had already picked up the scent of their pursuers, his nose low to the ground, moving with an efficiency that was second nature to him. The dark shadows of the warehouse were quickly replaced by the stark openness of the street, and Jake knew that they were now exposed. They were running, but they weren't safe yet. Suddenly, the distant sound of tires skidding on the snow broke through the air. Jake's heart skipped a beat. They were being hunted. The black SUVs of Falcon had already found their trail and they were closing in fast. "Go, Rex!" Jake shouted, his voice low but urgent. Rex barked once, a signal that he understood the gravity of the situation. Without hesitation, the dog veered left, darting down a narrow alley that cut through the heart of Redfield. Jake followed close behind, the weight of the gun at his side, a constant reminder of the danger they were facing. Liam's footsteps faltered, but Jake glanced back to see the boy's eyes locked on Rex, who was moving swiftly through the maze of alleys. The dog's presence seemed to calm Liam, and the boy pushed forward, following the path Rex had chosen. But Jake could hear the sound of the SUVs getting closer. He could feel the cold metal of their pursuer's presence looming behind them. Every turn, every corner they rounded seemed to close the gap between them and the vehicles. Time was running out. As they reached a dead end, Jake's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them forever, but they had one chance, a decision that would determine whether they lived or died. He looked at Rex, who had stopped at the edge of the alley, his eyes now scanning the building across the street. It was an old storage warehouse, its metal doors slightly ajar. Into the building, Jake barked, his voice commanding. Without question, Rex bolted forward, leading the way as Jake followed closely behind. Elena and Liam rushed after them, but the sound of the engines roared closer. They reached the building just as the first of the SUVs came into view. The narrow door was wide enough for them to slip through, but not for much longer. The men chasing them were relentless. Inside the building was cold and empty, a maze of rusted pipes and scattered crates. Jake's mind raced as he scanned the dim interior, looking for a way out. Rex moved ahead, sniffing the air, his body tense as he led them through the dark corridors of the warehouse. But as they moved deeper into the building, Jake's heart pounded with one question: could they outrun the enemy in here, or would they be trapped? The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. The danger was closing in. The next moments would decide their fate. The cold, metallic scent of the abandoned warehouse lingered in the air, mixing with the faintest trace of smoke. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest as he sprinted through the shadowy corridors, Rex leading the way with his sharp senses and unwavering determination. Behind him, Elena and Liam followed close, their footsteps echoing in the silence, adding to the intensity of their escape. Jake's mind raced as they darted through the maze of crates and steel beams, each turn taking them further from the men chasing them, but closer to an uncertain fate. The SUV engines roared outside their relentless pursuit, unmistakable, and Jake knew they didn't have much time before they'd be trapped. His thoughts flashed to Ruby, to the USB, to everything they had worked for, everything they had to protect. Rex suddenly stopped, his body tense, ears pinned forward. Jake skidded to a halt beside him. The dog's posture told him everything he needed to know. Their enemies were close, too close. A loud crash from the entrance signaled that the SUVs had made it inside and the men were closing in. Jake's heart sank. They were no longer running. They were cornered. "Get down!" Jake shouted as he pulled Liam and Elena closer to a stack of crates. They crouched low, trying to blend in with the shadows as the sound of boots pounding against the floor grew louder. Jake's grip tightened on his gun as he motioned for Elena and Liam to stay quiet. The sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse, but it wasn't just any footstep. It was the sound of someone moving with purpose, someone in charge. Jake's eyes narrowed. Victor Hale was here. The mastermind behind the Falcon network, the one person who had orchestrated everything, the man who had caused all of this. Ruby's disappearance, the threats against Liam, and the deadly game they were all now caught in. The flicker of movement near the far end of the building confirmed Jake's suspicions. Hale was standing by a row of metal crates, his figure shrouded in shadow, his face half hidden by the brim of his cap. He was calm, too calm, and the smug expression he wore told Jake that this moment had been anticipated. He had been waiting for this. "You're not going to win this," Jake Hale called out in a voice that echoed through the space, filled with both arrogance and menace. "You've come too far and you've made your choice, but you're just a piece in the game. The bigger picture is already in motion." Jake clenched his jaw, taking a step forward. His eyes locked on Hale. He couldn't let this man walk away. Not after everything he had done. "You're right about one thing," Jake replied, his voice low but filled with determination. "I've made my choice, and I'm not backing down now. This ends tonight." Hale let out a mocking laugh, stepping forward and revealing a small group of armed men standing behind him. His presence was commanding, and his eyes gleamed with a cold certainty. "You think you can stop me?" Hale asked, his tone smooth and confident. "You think you can stop Falcon? I've got connections everywhere. You're not even a threat anymore." Jake's grip on his gun tightened as he watched Hale move closer. There was no time to waste. This was it, the final confrontation. Rex growled softly, his body tense and ready for the attack. Jake turned to Elena and Liam, motioning for them to stay back. It was clear now that this would be a fight for their lives, a fight that could determine everything. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Jake said, his voice steady. "Give up the USB, it's over for you." Hale's expression shifted and the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. For a moment, everything hung in balance. The sound of footsteps from the other side of the room, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the low growl from Rex. It was all too much. The tension in the air was suffocating, and Jake knew that one wrong move would be the end of them. Without warning, one of Hale's men lunged forward, aiming a gun straight for Jake. But Rex was faster. The dog lunged, knocking the man off balance, and the fight erupted into chaos. Gunshots rang out in rapid succession, and Jake moved into the fray, dodging the gunfire and taking down the men in swift, calculated moves. His training kicked in, and every shot he took was precise, deliberate. But it wasn't just about taking down Hale's men, it was about stopping the network. It was about ending Falcon's reign of terror once and for all. As the battle raged on, Jake realized that this was the moment of truth. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking down Falcon and bringing an end to everything they represented. The battle had raged for what felt like hours. The warehouse was a war zone. Shattered glass, overturned crates, and the heavy scent of gunpowder filled the air. Jake had fought with everything he had, his movements sharp and precise. But amid the chaos, his focus never wavered. His mission was clear: stop Falcon, save Ruby, and protect Liam. But when the gunfire finally ceased and the silence settled over the warehouse, Jake knew that the battle wasn't over for everyone. The reality hit him hard. The price of their victory had been steep. Ruby was gone, a casualty in the fight against Falcon. Despite everything she had uncovered, the network had silenced her, and Jake had failed to get to her in time. Rex, standing at Jake's side, had been the unwavering protector throughout the entire ordeal. The dog had stayed by his side, taking down threats with a force and precision only a canine could manage. But Jake could see the weariness in Rex's eyes, the toll the battle had taken on them both. Yet there was also something else, a quiet strength, a bond that could never be broken. Jake looked around at the aftermath. The men they had fought were either incapacitated or taken down, and Victor Hale had disappeared into the shadows, slipping away just as Jake had almost caught him. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. The operation was crumbling, and the pieces of Falcon's empire were falling apart. They had won. But the cost of that victory still lingered. "Ruby," Jake whispered under his breath, his heart heavy with sorrow. Behind him, Liam stood silently, his face pale and his eyes distant. The boy had witnessed the chaos, and Jake knew this day would haunt him forever. But there was something else there now, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Jake Liam's voice was soft, tentative as he approached him. The boy was no longer the frightened, lost child who had walked into the station that night. There was strength in him now, a new sense of purpose. Jake turned to face him, and for the first time since Ruby's death, he saw a flicker of something brighter in Liam's eyes. "You did it," Liam said quietly. "You saved me. You saved us." Jake knelt down, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "You saved yourself, Liam," Jake said, his voice thick. "You're stronger than you know." Liam looked up at him, his face filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said, his voice shaking. "You and Rex, you're my family now." Jake's chest tightened at the words, the weight of them sinking deep. He had promised Ruby he would protect Liam, and now, despite the cost of it all, he had kept that promise. Rex, ever the loyal companion, padded up to Liam, nuzzling his side as if offering the same silent reassurance that he had given Jake. The boy bent down, his fingers trembling as he stroked the dog's fur. "I don't know how to thank you, Rex," Liam whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been with me every step of the way. I don't know what I'd do without you." Rex's tail wagged gently as if understanding the significance of the moment. His bond with Liam was just as strong as the one he shared with Jake. Unspoken, unwavering, and full of loyalty. Jake stood up, his hand resting gently on Liam's shoulder. The weight of everything that had happened was still heavy, but in this moment the future seemed a little brighter. They had survived. They had overcome the darkness that had threatened to swallow them whole. "We'll get through this," Jake said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll rebuild. You're not alone anymore, Liam. You have us, and we're not going anywhere." The three of them, Jake, Rex, and Liam, stood together in the quiet aftermath, the cold night air drifting through the warehouse. The world had changed in ways they could never have imagined, but in this moment they had found something new. A family born not of blood, but of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Jake looked down at Rex, who was standing guard beside Liam, his head tilted slightly as if understanding the promise that had just been made. The dog had saved them all, and now they were a family. The storm outside had passed. The world was quiet again, and with it a new chapter began. As we reflect on the journey of Jake, Rex, and Liam, one undeniable truth shines through. The unwavering loyalty and love of a dog can change everything. Rex, the German Shepherd, wasn't just a canine on a mission. He was a guardian, a protector, and a constant source of strength for a young boy who had lost everything. Through the darkest moments, Rex's presence was a beacon of hope, reminding us of the transformative power of unconditional love and trust. The story of Rex and Liam serves as a powerful reminder of the incredible bond that can exist between humans and animals. It shows us that in a world full of uncertainty and betrayal, there are still those, like Rex, who stand by us, fiercely protecting and offering the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. The loyalty of a German Shepherd is something truly special. Their intelligence, strength, and dedication are unmatched, and their ability to comfort, heal, and guide is nothing short of extraordinary. At its core, this story is about family. It's about finding strength in those who love us even when they are not bound by blood. Jake and Liam found a new family in each other and in Rex, and it's a reminder to all of us that family can be formed through trust, loyalty, and shared experiences, no matter where we come from. In a world that can often feel broken, stories like this are a reminder of the healing power of love, whether from a dog, a friend, or a family member. And like Rex, we all have the potential to be that source of strength for someone who needs us. The love we give, especially to our loyal animal companions, can be the spark that helps others heal and find their way.